A quiet house stood beside a frozen Wisconsin lake, carrying a history no one wanted reopened. Inside one repaired wall, a retired detection dog found the scent of an old military recorder. For 24 years, former Navy technician Ansel Marrow had lived beneath the blame for a fatal test accident. But the damaged recording preserved something the official report had left out: a warning, a valid stop order, and a command to continue. The truth could restore Ansel's name, yet exposing it carelessly could destroy the man he had once tried to protect. This is not a story about finding one villain, but about the many silences that allowed one person to carry everyone's failure. After listening, tell us what stayed with you most. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. Marrow glass appeared beneath the winter sun as if someone had cleaned the whole town overnight and forgotten to put the colors back. Snow lay thick across the pitched roofs and narrow porches. It softened the shoulders of parked trucks, covered old stone walls, and gathered in smooth white folds beneath the pines. At the end of the main road, Winnecove Lake stretched toward the horizon, frozen so evenly that it looked less like water than a sheet of pale glass set into the earth. Cormac Varden slowed his truck as he passed the town sign. Marrow glass population 2,814. Someone had hung a strand of faded evergreen beneath it. The ribbon tied at the center had frozen into a hard red knot. Cormac noticed the road branching toward the lake, the fire station, the single-story medical clinic, and the dark brick building that had once served as an administrative office for the winter testing facility. He noticed the cameras above the bank entrance and the rusted mounting brackets on several utility poles, where older surveillance equipment had been removed. He noticed things automatically. At 56, the habit had survived longer than most of the institutions that had trained it into him. Sable sat upright in the passenger seat, her amber eyes moving between the windshield and Cormac's hands. She was a German shepherd with a honey gold coat, a narrow black saddle across her back, and a dark muzzle beginning to silver beneath the chin. The tip of her left ear leaned slightly outward, giving her an expression that could look curious even when she was perfectly serious. Cormac turned onto a smaller road lined with birch trees. "We're not working," he told her. Sable glanced at him, then returned her attention to the snowbanks. He had said the same thing 3 times since crossing into Wisconsin. The house stood near the edge of the forest, a quarter mile from the lake and far enough from the nearest neighbor that the silence felt intentional. It was smaller than it had appeared in the bank photographs. 2 stories, weathered cedar siding, a steep roof, and a narrow porch sagging slightly near the eastern corner. The front windows were intact. That had been one of the selling points. The listing had also described the property as possessing significant restoration potential, which Cormac understood to mean that nearly everything worked badly, but had not yet failed in a legally actionable way. He parked beside a drift and stepped into air sharp enough to tighten his lungs. Cormac stood 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with the controlled balance of a man who rarely wasted movement. His olive-drab combat shirt fit close through the torso, while the camouflage sleeves showed beneath an open, dark green winter jacket. His ash-brown hair was cut in a clean undercut, silver concentrated at the temples. He had no beard, no visible scar, and none of the ceremonial roughness people expected from men who had spent part of their lives in uniform. The years showed elsewhere. They lived in the lines beside his gray-green eyes and in the way he paused before entering any unfamiliar room. Sable jumped down after him. Her paws sank into the powder, and she stood still for a moment, reading the wind. The bank representative arrived 5 minutes later in a compact sedan that struggled through the last stretch of unplowed road. Her name was Dana Kessler. She was in her early 60s, bundled in a plum-colored coat with a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. "The furnace has been running," she said after greeting him. "Barely, but consistently." "That sounds reassuring." "It's the most reassuring way I can phrase it." Dana handed him the keys and gave the house the look of someone pleased to transfer responsibility for it. The previous owner, she explained, had fallen behind on payments after years of irregular employment. The foreclosure had taken longer than expected because the property records were incomplete and the owner had stopped responding to notices. Ansel Marrow, she said, checking the name in her folder. That was the final title holder. Cormac looked toward the house. Do you know where he went? No forwarding address. Her answer came too quickly to invite another question. Dana showed him the electrical panel, the shut-off valve, and a basement window that would need sealing before the next storm. She did not enter the small room at the rear of the first floor. She stood in the hallway and pointed instead. That was used as an office, apparently. Apparently? The bank inventory listed workbenches, old radio equipment, parts cabinets. Most of it was gone by the time the property was secured. Cormac stepped into the room. It faced the lake through two narrow windows. Dust lay in pale lines where shelves had once stood. The walls were mismatched. Old pine paneling on three sides, newer drywall along the lower portion of the fourth. A dead electrical outlet sat close to the floor. Sable entered behind him. She checked the corners, sniffed the baseboards, paused near the ventilation register, then looked back at Cormac. No assignment, he reminded her. Her tail lowered slightly. She walked out. Dana watched from the doorway. Was she military? Specialized detection. For explosives? Electronics. Dana looked toward the empty office again, as though the answer had changed the room. Cormac closed the door gently behind them. By noon, the deed was signed, Dana's sedan had disappeared down the road, and the house belonged to him in the official sense. In every other sense, it still belonged to weather, neglect, and the shape of another man's habits. Cormac unpacked methodically. Tools in the rear room, food in the kitchen, Sable's bed near the radiator, though he knew she would ignore it for the first few nights. His waterproof notebook went on the counter beside a silver voltage tester. He had brought enough equipment to begin work immediately, and not enough furniture to pretend comfort had been the priority. The plan was simple. Repair the first floor, build an isolated workbench, install secure storage, begin accepting small restoration jobs by spring. Old radios, damaged drives, corrupted service records, devices owned by veterans who had learned too late that memory could be lost through something as ordinary as a failed circuit board. Cormac did not consider the work charitable. Charity implied distance between the giver and the need. He understood lost records. He understood what happened when a system decided that an incomplete file was complete enough. Late that afternoon, he drove into town for lumber, insulation, and electrical supplies. Morrow Glass Hardware occupied a long wooden building near the frozen rail spur. Inside, the air smelled of pine boards, rubber boots, and coffee that had been left on the burner too long. A broad man behind the counter helped Cormac locate conduit clamps. His name tag read, Reed. "You bought the Marrow place," Reed said after seeing the delivery address. The sentence was not a question. Cormac placed a box of outlet covers on the counter. Yesterday. A customer near the wood stove looked over. Another man stopped sorting screws into paper bags. Reed Halverson was around 60, thick through the chest and arms, with pale blonde-gray hair under a grease-marked cap. He had the hands of someone who spent his life inside engines. The moment Ansel's name entered the conversation, those hands stopped moving. "Bank finally got rid of it," one of the customers said. "Bank sold it," Reed corrected. "Same difference." Cormac waited. People often filled silence when they believed silence was judging them. The customer by the stove obliged. "Marrow worked out at the winter test site before it shut down. He was responsible for that accident." Another man shook his head. "Responsible isn't the word I heard. I heard he stole equipment after." "He ran. He stayed in that house for years." "That doesn't mean he didn't run from what he did." The versions overlapped without agreeing. Ansel had ignored a warning. Ansel had issued the wrong command. Ansel had taken restricted hardware. Ansel had lied in an inquiry. Ansel had become unstable. Ansel had refused to apologize. Each speaker possessed one clean piece of certainty. Together, they produced no coherent truth. Cormac looked at Reed. "You knew him?" Reed wiped his hands on a shop rag, though they were already clean. "Knew of him." It was the kind of answer designed to close a door without appearing rude. Cormac paid for his supplies. As he turned to leave, Reed said, "That office in the back of the house. Check the wiring before you put anything valuable in there." Cormac stopped. "Why?" "Old place. Marrow changed things himself." "Changed what?" But Reed had already reached for the next customer's order. Outside, snow had begun falling in small, bright flakes. Sable waited in the truck, watching the hardware store door. Cormac loaded the lumber and looked back through the front window. Reed was no longer at the counter. That evening, the house settled around him with unfamiliar noises. Pipes clicked behind the kitchen wall, wind moved beneath the eaves. Somewhere upstairs, a loose board responded to changes in temperature with a soft knock that repeated every 20 minutes. Cormac worked in the rear office beneath a hanging utility lamp. He removed the dead outlet cover and tested the wires. No current. The conduit behind it did not follow the expected path toward the electrical panel. Instead, it turned downward and disappeared behind the newer section of wall. He made a note in his book. Sable entered, sniffed once near the door, and left. An hour later she returned. This time she walked directly to the repaired wall. Cormac looked up from a box of fittings. Sable moved along the baseboard with her nose low. She stopped beside the dead outlet, sat, touched her muzzle toward a narrow gap near the floor, and looked at him. The behavior was quiet, exact, and old. Cormac remained still. "Sable?" Her eyes stayed on his. He stood and crossed the room. There was no visible device, no loose cable, no obvious source. He crouched beside the wall and ran his fingers over the patched surface, new plaster, old paneling behind it. Sable touched her nose toward the gap again. For one dangerous second, the room became too familiar. Not in appearance, but in function. A closed space. A trained animal waiting. A hidden object. A decision that could not be taken back once made. Cormac withdrew his hand. "No." Sable did not move. "We verify." He opened the window slightly, set a portable fan in the hall, and redirected the airflow through the office. Then he clipped on Sable's leash and took her outside. They walked to the edge of the property while snow gathered on the shoulders of his jacket. The frozen lake showed between the trees, white beneath a washed blue sky. Sable moved beside him without pulling, but every few steps she looked back toward the house. Cormac gave the room 40 minutes. When they returned, he brought Sable through the kitchen instead of the hallway. He allowed her to inspect the first floor freely. She passed the stairs, ignored the radiator, checked the pantry, then entered the rear office and stopped at the same place. "Sit." Nose toward the gap, eyes on Cormac. He felt no excitement. Discovery had never felt exciting to him. Discovery was only the moment when uncertainty changed shape. Cormac sent Sable to her bed and retrieved a stud finder, a wire detector, and a narrow inspection probe. Behind the patched section, the readings showed a hollow space larger than a normal conduit channel. He removed 2 screws from the outlet box. The metal housing came forward reluctantly, releasing a smell of old wood, insulation, and faint chemical residue. Behind it, the conduit ended abruptly. Someone had cut it years earlier. Cormac angled his flashlight into the opening. The beam caught the edge of something dull and rectangular. He widened the access carefully, removing only enough material to reach inside. His fingers met cold metal wrapped in deteriorating protective fabric. The object slid forward inch by inch. It was an old, moisture-resistant storage case, smaller than a shoebox. One corner had corroded. A severed cable trailed from the rear, and a cracked seal along the lid explained how Sable had caught the scent of its internal components. Cormac placed it on a clean rubber mat. He did not open it. The case bore no readable warning label, but the remaining hardware was industrial, not domestic. Near the cable port, Part of a faded identification plate remained beneath grime. Whatever had been stored inside had once been connected to something. Cormac photographed the case from every side. He recorded the date, time, location, condition of the wall, and sequence of removal in his notebook. Only when he finished did he realize Sable had left the room. He found her lying beside the front door. Her harness rested on a hook. Without it, she looked older and less official, simply a dog stretched across worn floorboards. She was no longer interested in the case. Her amber eyes were fixed through the narrow glass panel toward the snow-covered yard. Cormac stood behind her. The dark trees shifted beneath the wind. No vehicle waited on the road. No footsteps crossed the fresh snow. Nothing was there. Still, Sable watched. Cormac looked back toward the rear office, where the sealed case sat under the utility lamp. The object itself did not trouble him most. Objects had dimensions. They could be cataloged, tested, isolated. What unsettled him was the man connected to it. Ansel Marrow had lived in that house for years, while an entire town repeated different stories about his guilt. He had hidden something behind a wall, left it connected to an abandoned conduit, and then lost the house without returning for it. Cormac rested one hand against the doorframe. Outside, Winnecove Lake lay frozen beneath the winter night. Behind him, a box waited unopened. And somewhere beyond the property, perhaps still alive, was a man who had once believed the contents were safer inside a wall than in anyone else's hands. By 8 the next morning, Harlan had placed 3 bottles of tap water in a small insulated cooler and driven them across North Glass. He had filled each bottle from a different point in the house: the kitchen sink, the basement utility tap, and the outdoor line nearest the damaged pipe. He labeled them with time, location, and temperature in block letters using the brass mechanical pencil he normally reserved for repair diagrams. The woman at the local testing office accepted the cooler without reacting to the story behind it. She wore a white coat over a green sweater and explained that a basic screening could be completed quickly, but a certified analysis for industrial compounds would take several days and might need to be sent to a larger laboratory in Duluth. Harlan paid in advance. He did not mention that Calder had refused the water. A dog stepping away from a bowl was a reason to become cautious, not a conclusion anyone could defend. Outside the office, North Glass shone beneath a clear winter sky. Snowbanks reflected so much light that every building seemed cut from white metal. Freight trucks moved toward the harbor in a steady line, their tires grinding salt into the road. Harlan sat in his truck for a moment with the heater running. He had spent most of his working life separating what he suspected from what he could prove. On a ship, panic could spread faster than smoke. A man who called every hot pipe a fire lost credibility before the real emergency arrived. But a man who waited too long could lose more than credibility. Calder sat in the rear seat behind him, his harness resting on the floor. The dog looked toward the road, then back at Harlan. "I know," Harlan said. Calder had not made a sound. That was often how their conversations worked. The pump repair shop stood north of town near an old rail spur and a low brick building whose faded sign read Rusk Pump and Motor in hand-painted blue letters. Snow had been cleared from the entrance with practical aggression, leaving 2 walls of packed ice along the drive. Inside, the shop smelled of machine oil, hot dust, rubber belts, and coffee that had been allowed to become a separate industrial product. Delphine Rusk stood behind a workbench with a motor housing clamped open in front of her. Del was 62, compact and strong through the forearms, with silver-streaked hair cut to her jaw and pinned away from one side of her face by a crescent-shaped steel clip. She wore a faded navy work bib over a brick-red flannel shirt. A folding wooden ruler protruded from one pocket. She looked up when Harlan entered. Then she looked past him at Calder. "Dog can come in," she said. "You can remain under review." Harlan closed the door behind them. "Good morning to you, too." "It was until you brought that expression into my shop." "What expression?" "The one you wore at every shoreline meeting before deciding you had someplace better to be." Calder moved past Harlan and sniffed the lower edge of a cabinet. Dell watched him with more welcome than she had offered the man. Harlan set his phone on the bench and opened the photographs. "I found an old utility cover behind the house." Dell did not reach for the phone. "So call the city." It had this mark. He enlarged the image. The change in her face was slight, but immediate. Her eyes sharpened. She wiped both hands on a rag and took the phone. The image showed the rusted circle crossed by 3 wavy lines. Dell stared at it for several seconds. "Where, exactly?" "Backslope, near the old drainage cut." "And you opened it?" "No." That earned him the first hint of approval. "Calder reacted to the air coming through the rim," he continued. "Metallic, sweet. I shut off the water this morning and sent samples for testing." Dell handed the phone back. "Smartest thing you've done in 10 years. "That a compliment?" "No." Harlan showed her the images of the loosened valve, the cut pipe, the false warning sign, and the fresh boot prints. Dell studied each one without commentary. When he reached the photograph of the dark mud on the signpost, she leaned closer. "That didn't come from your front yard." "I know." "You know now?" The sentence landed without force, which made it harder to resist. Years earlier, Dell had helped organize meetings about water pressure failures in Shoreline Ward. Residents had described strange odors, mineral buildup, and pets avoiding certain taps. Harlan had attended one meeting, listened for 40 minutes, and left without signing the request for an independent inspection. The reports had been inconsistent, different houses, different months, no single pattern he could verify. At least, that was what he had told himself. Dell had called it hiding behind standards no one else had the money to meet. Standing in her shop now, Harlan could still see the old meeting room. Folding chairs, wet coats, paper cups, people talking over one another because fear had made them impatient. He had disliked the disorder of it. He had mistaken that dislike for judgment. "I should have stayed," he said. Dell's eyes lifted from the phone. There was no apology shaped beautifully enough to repair a decade. Harlan knew that. He did not add explanations. Dell looked at him for a long moment, then took the wooden ruler from her pocket. "Come on." She led him through a steel door into the storage building behind the shop. The room was colder than the front, crowded with old pump casings, cracked gauges, coils of copper line, and shelves sagging beneath binders. Dell moved through it without hesitation, tapping the ruler against boxes as though waking memories. "Your house wasn't the pumping station," she said. "People always get that wrong." "I never called it one." "You let the real estate agent call it that. I didn't buy the history, I bought the roof. That's the problem with history. It doesn't care what part you paid for." She pulled a canvas cover from a flat wooden cabinet and opened one of the wide drawers. Inside lay rolled maps, yellowed at the edges. "The main pressure station sat closer to the lake," Dell said, "torn down in '78. The house was built for the operator, easier to keep someone nearby when the valves froze or pressure dropped at 2 in the morning." She selected a roll tied with blue string. "When the station came out, most of the working equipment went with it, but not every access point, too expensive to fill some of them correctly. So the city capped them, wrote a note, and moved on." "That utility cover behind my house?" "Could be an overflow access, could be inspection. Depends which revision survived." Dell spread the map over a scarred work table. Calder approached but stopped before placing his paws near the paper. Harlan gave him a quiet hand signal, and the dog settled beside the table. Dell weighted the corners with metal fittings. The drawing showed Shoreline Ward before the warehouses, before the new freight corridor, before most of the streets had been renamed. Fine blue and black lines passed beneath house lots and service roads. Some ended at symbols Harlan recognized. Others disappeared under later pencil corrections. Dell traced one line with the ruler. "Here's your property. Operator's house here, pressure chamber here." The line passed beneath Harlan's basement and continued south. It crossed what was now Meridian Crown property. Dell moved the ruler again. "This section used to run beneath the maintenance yard. Then the solvent storage was built over it." Was it active? Depends what you mean by active. Carrying normal flow? Probably not. Open enough to move groundwater, overflow, or whatever someone sent through the wrong valve? That's a different question. Harlan leaned over the map. The line reappeared beyond the storage yard and joined a branch marked as municipal drainage. Then it went back toward the neighborhood. Before the later upgrades, yes. Why isn't it on the current utility map? Dell gave him a tired look. Because current maps are written by people who believe old things stop existing when they stop billing for them. She went to a shelf and returned with a red binder. Inside were maintenance sheets written in several hands. Dell found an entry from 24 years earlier describing a secondary basement inspection access at the operator's residence. Harlan read it twice. Basement. Move anything heavy lately? There's a steel cabinet against the north wall. Dell folded her arms. And you never wondered why the concrete beneath it sounded hollow? I don't strike every floor I own with a hammer. You used to inspect damaged ships. I was trying not to inspect my house like one. The answer came sharper than he intended. Dell did not retreat from it. For a moment, the storage room became very quiet. Then Calder rose and moved between them, not touching either person. He stood with his head low, golden black coat bright beneath the cold overhead light. Dell looked at the dog. You still do that? She asked Harlan. Do what? Turn every question into an accusation before anyone else gets the chance? Harlan's first response formed quickly. He let it go. Dell returned her attention to the binder. I'll come look at the basement, she said. Not because we're even. I didn't ask you to be. No, that's another thing you're good at. The drive back to Shoreline Ward took less than 15 minutes. During that time, Harlan received an email from Meridian Crown's legal office. The subject line read, Structural Safety Notification. Attached was a report from a private engineering firm stating that a suspected pipe failure near the foundation might have compromised the soil. The city had scheduled an emergency inspection in 3 days. Dell read the report from Harlan's phone while standing in his kitchen. They inspected the soil? No. They entered the property? No. Then this is an assessment based on outside observations and whatever Meridian gave them. It says potential immediate concern. That phrase is doing a lot of paid labor. Calder moved toward the basement door. The house below was unfinished except for the utility area and a narrow workshop. Harlan switched on the lights and descended first. Calder followed until his paws reached the top metal-edged stair tread. He stopped. Harlan did not call him. Dell watched from below as Harlan waited on the third step, body angled away from the dog. After several breaths, Calder came down slowly, placing each paw with care. No praise. No command. Only room. The steel storage cabinet stood against the north wall. Harlan and Dell emptied the tools from it, then dragged it forward across the concrete. Behind it, the floor looked ordinary. Dell tapped the ruler against the surface. Solid. She moved 6 inches and struck again. The sound changed. Hollow. Together they scraped away an old layer of gray floor paint. A rusted iron ring emerged, set flat into a circular steel plate. Dell crouched and ran one finger along the edge. Inspection cover. Harlan saw the welding before she pointed it out. A bead of metal sealed the entire rim. The weld was smooth, bright beneath the dust, and far newer than the plate. Dell touched it once, then looked up. This wasn't done when the system was abandoned. How new? Could be months. Could be weeks, but not decades. Calder approached the plate, sniffed the air above it, and withdrew without stepping onto the metal. Harlan's gaze moved to the small basement window. One of his cameras covered the side yard. Another watched the back gate. Neither showed the basement. He went upstairs and opened the recorded files from the previous night. At 2:16 a.m., the outside lights flickered. The camera image froze. At 2:23, the feed returned. 7 minutes missing. The system log blamed a power interruption, but the other houses on the street were gone. There was no neighbor whose lights he could compare. Dell stood behind him, arms crossed. Someone knew where the access was. Anne knew the cameras would reset, or tested them first. By mid-afternoon, a dark SUV pulled up outside the house. The man who stepped out wore a navy parka over a gray sweater and dark trousers. He was tall, lean, and so carefully put together that the salt on the road seemed unwilling to touch him. Corbin Vale Strake introduced himself as Meridian Crown's Regional Development Director. His hair was steel gray and precisely combed. A matte titanium ring rested on his right hand, and he turned it once with his thumb while looking at the empty lot surrounding Harlan's home. "I thought it might be better to speak without attorneys," Strake said. "Attorneys already spoke. Attorneys explain positions. I'd like to explain consequences." Harlan remained on the porch. Calder stood inside the storm door, visible but quiet. Strake spoke about freight capacity, winter shipping delays, and tax revenue. He knew the number of jobs attached to each construction phase. He knew how many businesses had left North Glass in the last decade. He did not sound dishonest. That made him more difficult to dismiss. "A nearly empty neighborhood cannot determine the economic future of an entire port," Strake said. "A nearly empty neighborhood became empty because your company bought it. Voluntarily. Under increasing pressure. Pressure is not coercion." Harlan looked toward the steel fencing where houses had once stood.
"That depends who controls the clock."
Strake offered a new contract. The amount was substantially higher. The deadline was 10 days. Harlan read the first page, then the environmental waiver. "Why is this here?" "Standard language, then remove it." "I don't draft the agreements. You direct development." Strake's thumb turned the ring again. "The property has documented structural concerns. We're trying to give you an exit before those concerns reduce its value." Harlan folded the contract. "If your company trusts inspections and legal process, why are people cutting my fence at night?" Strake's face remained composed. "No employee or authorized contractor of Meridian Crown has been instructed to enter your property unlawfully." "That wasn't what I asked." "It is the answer I can give." Harlan handed the papers back. Strake did not take them. "Keep them," he said. "Read everything." "I do." For the first time, Strake looked directly at the house rather than at Harlan. His gaze rested briefly on the basement window. Then he walked back to the SUV. That small movement stayed with Harlan long after the vehicle left. After dark, Dell returned with a flashlight, a portable work lamp, and a small inspection mirror. She studied the welded plate again, but refused to let Harlan cut it open. "We don't know what's underneath," she said. "Gas, pressure, contamination, bad air. Pick whichever mistake you prefer." Harlan knew she was right. He disliked that this no longer felt like his own problem to solve. Dell searched through the photocopies she had made from the old binder. Near the bottom of one faded maintenance sheet, she found a handwritten note. She read it once without speaking. "What?" Harlan asked. Dell turned the paper toward him. The note described the basement access as a secondary sampling point to be used after a chemical incident in the waterfront storage zone. Harlan looked from the paper to the newly welded cover. The access had not merely survived by accident, it had been designed to preserve information when something upstream went wrong. His phone was already in his hand when Dell spoke. "Call someone who knows water chemistry. Not city maintenance, not the port." Harlan searched the state professional directory and found a name Dell recognized from an independent watershed case several counties south. Dr. Leona V. Maris answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was low, precise, and impatient with unnecessary detail. Harlan explained the old access, the odor, the suspected contamination, and the new weld. She interrupted only once. "Did you open it?" "No." "Did your dog make direct contact with the vapor?" "Briefly outside, not with the basement plate." Keep him away from both locations. Shut the basement door. Do not cut the well. Do not enter any drainage structure. Ventilate only if you can do it without pulling air into the living space. When can you come? There was a pause filled by the sound of typing. Tomorrow morning, weather permitting. After the call, Dell returned to the map. Calder lay near the basement door, alert but no longer trying to approach it. Dell traced the old pipe beneath Harlan's house, across the former maintenance yard, and toward the solvent storage zone. Then she found a notation written in red pencil at the margin. Emergency sample access, residential operator house. No equivalent notation appeared on the modern map Harlan had downloaded from the city. The old access point had not simply been forgotten. Somewhere between paper and digital record, it had been erased, and someone had recently come back to seal it. Marrow glass kept its dead in the center of town. The memorial stood in a square between the public library and the old radio station, where the morning sun reached it before most of the surrounding buildings. Snow had been cleared from the stone path, but a thin white rim remained along the base of the monument. Cormac stopped several feet away. 9 names had been carved into a slab of dark granite. Beneath them was a short inscription about duty, sacrifice, and the cost of service. It did not describe the accident. It did not mention the aircraft, the failed guidance system, or the decisions made before the test resumed. It did not name Ansel Marrow. It did not need to. Someone had placed a small wreath beneath the inscription. A navy blue ribbon crossed the green branches, and frost had stiffened the fabric into a permanent fold. Sable stood beside Cormac in her gray-blue harness, nose raised toward the cold air. She did not approach the monument. The square carried too many overlapping scents: salt, boots, evergreen, pigeons, old stone, for any one of them to matter. Cormac read the names twice. One of them was Caleb Crowell. He knew the name from the local archive index. Systems Safety Specialist, 39 years old at the time of the accident. One of the men recorded as having raised a concern about conditions near the ice corridor. A truck passed on the far side of the square. The driver slowed, glanced toward Cormac and Sable, then continued. The town had noticed him. Not because he was important, because strangers standing too long at memorials were usually looking for something. The Marrowglass Historical Room occupied the library's second floor. It was a narrow space with steel shelves, flat document boxes, microfilm cabinets, and a long table beneath windows facing the lake. The archivist, a retired school administrator named June Bell, asked Cormac to sign a request form before she brought him the accident collection. "Most people come in around the anniversary," she said. "You're early." "I'm not here for the anniversary." June glanced at Sable, who had settled beneath the table. "No," she said, "I suppose not." The files had been organized with the confidence of history already decided. Newspaper clippings, public statements, photographs of the test facility, transcripts from memorial broadcasts, donation records for the Winnicove Service Fund, copies of the final investigative summary. Cormac began with the earliest reports. The first day's article described confusion. Officials had not identified a cause. Witnesses reported a system warning before the aircraft departed its assigned corridor. One unnamed employee said the trial had been delayed twice that morning. By the third day, the language had narrowed. A procedural failure had occurred within the technical team. A week later, Ansel Marrow's name appeared. The article did not call him guilty. It used safer words: person of interest. Lead systems technician. Subject of an internal review. A month later, those distinctions had disappeared. Ansel had failed to respond properly to instability warnings. Ansel had removed equipment from the site. Ansel had provided an incomplete statement. No single article announced the moment suspicion became fact. The transition happened sentence by sentence, each one borrowing certainty from the last. Cormac made notes but copied no conclusions. On another shelf, he found transcripts from the radio station's annual remembrance program. Every winter, the names of the dead were read aloud. Family members spoke, music played. The accident was described as a tragedy caused by a chain of human errors. In later years, the phrase changed. The tragedy caused by one technician's failure to act. Cormac sat back. The alteration was only 6 words. It had changed the moral architecture of the entire event. Sable shifted under the table and rested her chin on his boot.
Cormac looked through the window toward the square. He had spent much of his career examining altered systems. The dangerous changes were rarely the dramatic ones. A deleted folder attracted attention. A changed permission setting did not. A forged report could be challenged. A phrase repeated for 20 years became culture. He returned to the files. The Winnicove Service Fund had been established 11 months after the accident. It paid for transportation, heating assistance, and short-term housing for adult veterans in the county. Photographs showed town dinners, winter drives, and volunteers stacking boxes in the old fire hall. The fund was not fraudulent. The memorial programs were not cynical. People had built something useful from loss. That made the question harder. If the story beneath the memorial was wrong, correcting it would not merely remove a lie. It would disturb the foundation beneath things that had helped real people. Cormac closed the file. For the first time since finding the module, he wondered whether he had mistaken access for permission. The thought stayed with him as he crossed the square toward WMGL Community Radio. The station occupied a 2-story brick building that had once housed the test facility's communications office. A metal antenna rose behind it, white against the winter sky. Through the front window, Cormac could see a small reception desk and a wall covered with framed photographs. Miriam Crowell met him in the hallway outside the main studio. She was 54, tall and lean, with dark brown hair touched by silver and tucked behind one ear. Her burgundy turtleneck and navy wool coat gave her a composed, almost formal appearance, though she wore no expression of welcome. Her voice was familiar before Cormac understood why. He had heard it in the archived broadcasts. "You requested access to our accident recordings," she said. "Yes. June Bell called me before approving it." "I didn't ask her to." "She didn't ask whether you had." Miriam opened the studio door. Inside, a silver microphone stood above the central desk. Its metal body was older than the rest of the equipment, polished smooth in places by years of handling. Through the interior glass, an empty control booth looked back at them. Sable paused at the threshold. Cormac gave a small hand signal. She entered and lay near the wall. Miriam noticed the gesture. She doesn't like studios. She likes knowing the room before she commits to it. Reasonable. It was the first thing they agreed upon. Cormac placed a folder on the desk but did not open it. "I found material connected to the winter test site." "So I heard." "From Reed?" "From 3 people who heard it from someone Reed refused to name." The town's information system, Cormac thought, operated faster than any secure network he had known. Miriam remained standing. "What kind of material?" "A recording module." "From the site?" "Possibly. That means no." "It means not yet proven." Her eyes hardened slightly. "And you're already asking for our archives." "I'm trying to establish context." "My brother's death is not context." "No." The answer made her pause. Cormac continued. "But the record of what happened before it may be incomplete." Miriam turned toward the silver microphone. Her fingers rested briefly on the edge of the desk. "My brother's name was Caleb," she said. "He was not a photograph in a folder. He was a safety specialist. He worked in that facility for 8 years. He complained about shortcuts before anyone else was willing to." "I read that." "You read a sentence." Cormac accepted the correction. Miriam looked back at him. "For 24 years, people have come here with theories. Contractor cover-up, military secrecy, weather interference, sabotage. Most of them want the same thing. They want the dead to become supporting characters in a mystery that makes them feel clever." "I'm not asking you to endorse a theory. You're asking me to help you reopen one. I'm asking for recordings that may identify voices. And what happens when you think you recognize one?
We verify it. What happens when you cannot? We say we cannot. Miriam gave a small, humorless breath. That sounds very clean. It should. Grief is not. Cormac looked through the studio glass. His reflection floated over the dark control room. Olive shirt, broad shoulders, gray at the temples, posture held too straight. Miriam's reflection stood several feet away. Between them, the microphone divided the room. I have an audio fragment, he said. Someone reports a stability problem. Someone orders the sequence held. Then another voice authorizes continuation. Miriam did not ask to hear it. Do you know who is speaking? No. Do you know when the clip begins relative to the accident? Not precisely. Do you know whether the person ordering a hold caused the problem in the first place? No. Then what exactly are you carrying into this town? Cormac had prepared technical answers. A forensic copy, damaged metadata, an independent recording window, a manual interruption tone. None answered her question. A possibility, he said. Miriam's expression shifted, not softer but less combative. A possibility can be crueler than a lie, she said. A lie eventually hardens. People build around it. A possibility opens every room again. She reached toward the microphone and adjusted it by less than an inch. This belonged to Caleb, she added. He bought it used when the station could not afford new equipment. After the accident, people asked me to replace it. I didn't. Cormac understood the object differently then. It was not merely a station fixture or memorial relic. It was evidence of the life Miriam had chosen to preserve because the person himself could not return. If the record is wrong, Cormac said, does leaving it unchanged protect him? Miriam looked at him. If the record is wrong, I want it corrected by more than a stranger with damaged audio. So do I. That answer seemed to anger her more than disagreement would have. She crossed her arms. Ansel Marrow had opportunities to speak. Did he? He gave a statement. I've only seen excerpts. He remained in town for years. Being present is not the same as being heard. Miriam's mouth tightened. He never apologized. Cormac considered the sentence. For what? The room went still. Miriam turned fully toward him. For Caleb. For all of them. What if he believed he hadn't caused it? Then he could have said that. What if he believed no one would listen? He could have tried. Cormac thought of Reed wiping clean hands on a shop rag. Fear worked, Reed had said. He also thought of the module inside the wall, hidden so carefully that the hiding itself had become a kind of testimony. I don't know why he stayed silent, Cormac said. I don't know whether he was innocent. But silence is not proof of guilt. Miriam looked down at the desk. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its broadcast steadiness. No, it's only what the rest of us have to live with. Sable rose from the wall and crossed halfway toward them. She did not go to Miriam. She stopped beside the old microphone stand and looked toward the control room window. Miriam watched her. Does she always do that? Do what? Stand where the tension is? Cormac glanced at Sable. I think she prefers places where everyone can see her. That is not the same thing. No. Miriam removed a ring of keys from her coat pocket. I'll allow you to review the station archive here. Nothing leaves the building. No copying voices without written authorization. No broadcast material gets used publicly. That's reasonable. It isn't trust. I didn't take it as trust. She unlocked a cabinet in the control room and handed him a request ledger. Before leaving, she paused at the door. If you discover that my brother's warning was ignored, I want to know. Cormac nodded. If you discover Ansel caused the fault before he ordered the stop, I want to know that too. You will. Miriam held his gaze. And if the recording cannot answer either question, do not make the town live inside your uncertainty just because you cannot tolerate it yourself. After she left, Cormac remained beside the desk. Her accusation had landed more precisely than he wanted to admit. He had always valued uncertainty when it belonged to data. He was less patient when it belonged to people. In systems work, uncertainty was a vulnerability to reduce. With human beings, reducing it too quickly could become another kind of damage. Sable sat near his chair. Cormac opened the first archive box. Inside were old planning meetings, weather advisories, volunteer interviews, memorial broadcasts, and staff recordings made months before the accident. Enough voices to begin comparison.
Enough grief to make careless listening unforgivable. By late afternoon, he had identified 2 training interviews featuring Caleb Kroll and 1 public safety briefing with several test site engineers. He found no recording of Ansel. Evelyn Hart Quaid called while he was packing his notes. Her name had come through a former Navy legal officer Cormac trusted. She practiced military record correction from an office in Milwaukee and had agreed to review the situation only after Cormac sent a written summary free of speculation. Her voice was controlled and unhurried. "Mr. Varden, I've read what you sent. Before we discuss the content, tell me where the original module is." "In a locked case at the house. That changes today." Cormac stepped into the station hallway. "Why?" "Because it may be former government property, potential evidence, or both. You do not currently know the classification status of the contents. You also do not have a defensible chain of custody beyond your own documentation." "I preserved the source. I'm not questioning your competence, I'm questioning your authority." The distinction was familiar and unwelcome. Evelyn arranged for the original device to be transferred the next morning to a licensed evidence storage facility while jurisdiction was reviewed. Cormac would retain a verified forensic copy under written restrictions. "You are not to provide the data to the press," she said. "I haven't. You are not to play it for local officials." "I haven't. You are not to contact Ansel Marrow until we understand whether your possession of the module creates exposure for him." Cormac looked through the station's front window toward the memorial. "You think finding him could hurt him. I think good intentions are not legal protection." Evelyn also told him she had contacted Commander Owen Ruskell, a retired Navy aviation safety investigator with no known connection to the original case. "He will not be impressed by the recording," she warned. "That's why I need him. No. You need him because you are already impressed by it." The following afternoon, Owen appeared on a secure video call from a study lined with technical manuals. He was 62, lean and upright, with close-cut silver hair, steel blue eyes, and a gray cardigan over a pale Oxford shirt. A pair of reading glasses rested beside a metal ruler on his desk. He reviewed Cormac's summary, Lenora's preliminary analysis, and photographs of the module. Then he said, "This proves almost nothing." Cormac waited. Owen tapped a page with the end of his pen. A stop command may mean someone recognized a fault. It may also mean that same person created the fault. The timing may be early enough to prevent harm or too late to matter. A senior authority may have ordered continuation because separate data showed the system was safe, or because the schedule mattered more. "Do not offer me motives before you have decisions." Cormac folded his arms. "What would you need?" "Pre-flight maintenance logs, weather and wind data from the test corridor, the complete investigative board record including draft findings and dissenting notes." "Anything else?" "Personnel assignments, command authority chart, contractor responsibility matrix." "That's more than 3 things. The first 3 tell us whether the audio matters. The rest tell us who had the right to speak." Cormac wrote them down. Owen's expression remained severe. "If Ansel Marrow issued the stop, that does not clear him. If someone overrode him, that does not automatically condemn them. Systems fail because people make choices inside structures. Find the structure." The call ended without encouragement. Cormac appreciated that more than he would have admitted. That evening, Reed came to the house carrying a folder he claimed to have found beneath old snowmobile invoices. Inside was a photocopied contractor transfer sheet.
After the accident, several maintenance records had been moved from Morrow Glass to a corporate records office in Michigan. One handwritten notation listed the verification team: A.B. Marrow, D.H. Kells. Reed tapped the second name. Dorian worked directly under Ansel on the guidance checks. Where is he now? I don't know. You remember him? You remember the men who stop speaking after a room turns against someone? Cormac studied the transfer sheet. He also found an old bank inspection record among the foreclosure documents. The house had been searched shortly after the accident under authority of an equipment recovery order. Years later, when the bank secured the property, a contractor had repaired the lower office wall after replacing damaged wiring. The hidden cavity had likely existed before the search. The final patch had been installed by someone who never knew what lay behind it. Nothing mystical, nothing impossible. Only one man hiding a module, an official search that failed to find it, and ordinary repair work sealing the secret for another generation. Near midnight, Lenora called. She had isolated the 4-tone alarm from the damaged recording and compared its frequency pattern with a surviving technical manual Owen had located. It is a manual sequence interruption, she said, not an automatic warning. So someone deliberately stopped the test. Someone initiated the hold command. And the order to proceed came after? In the recoverable sequence, yes, the interruption signal precedes the continuation instruction. Cormac stood beside the rear office window. Beyond the glass, snow moved lightly through the dark. Can we identify who triggered it? Not yet. Could it have been Ansel? It could have been anyone with access to the engineering or safety station. Cormac closed his eyes briefly. Lenora continued. But the official summary states that no effective manual interruption occurred before continuation. He opened his eyes. You're sure? I read the line 3 times. The contradiction was narrow but real. Either the summary had been written from incomplete system records, or someone had ignored evidence that a stop had been initiated. Cormac looked towards Sable, asleep beneath the table. The case no longer fit the story Marrowglass had chosen to remember. But Miriam had been right about one thing. A contradiction was not permission. It was only an obligation to proceed more carefully. On his desk lay the names Ansel Marrow and Dorian Kells. Beside them was Owen's list of missing records. Beyond the wall, the old house carried no more answers for the night. Cormac wrote one final sentence in his notebook. A stop occurred before the order to continue. Identity and responsibility remain unresolved. He underlined the last 3 words. Not because they weakened the discovery, because they were the only honest place to end. Evelyn Hart Quaid did not allow Cormac to call the first number he found. The name Ansel Marrow appeared in old property records, military summaries, newspaper archives, and one expired vehicle registration. None of those records answered the only question that mattered now, whether Ansel wanted to be found. Cormac stood in the rear office of the house by Winnicove Lake, phone in one hand, while Evelyn's voice came through the speaker. You are not conducting a fugitive search, she said. I know that. Then stop behaving like location is the same thing as consent. Cormac looked toward the section of wall they had opened. The new access panel sat temporarily in place, unpainted against the older pine. I only want to tell him what was found. And he may not want to hear it from a stranger who now owns his house. The sentence was accurate enough to irritate him. Evelyn continued. There are organizations that can contact him without exposing his current address. You give them a message. They decide whether it is safe to deliver. He decides whether to answer. What if he disappears again? Then he has exercised a right you do not like. Cormac said nothing. At the edge of the room, Sable lay beside the radiator, eyes half closed, her left ear tilted faintly toward Evelyn's voice. Cormac had spent much of his working life locating things that were not meant to be located. Hidden devices, unauthorized transmitters, false identities inside secure systems. In that world, resistance suggested danger. Human beings were different. Sometimes resistance was the last boundary a person still owned. Evelyn gave him the name of Maeve Larkin, a social worker attached to a transitional housing network for adult veterans in Minnesota. Maeve agreed to speak with him the next morning. She appeared on video from a small office with yellow walls and a coat rack crowded by winter parkas.
She was 51, with softly rounded features, green eyes, and reddish-brown hair streaked with silver and tied loosely at the back of her neck. A scratched turquoise thermos sat near her elbow. Cormac explained the module, the damaged recording, and why Ansel's testimony mattered. Maeve listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked, "What do you want from him?" "To confirm whether the device belonged to him." "That is what the investigation wants. What do you want?" Cormac glanced toward his notebook. "To tell him the official account may be incomplete." "Maybe?" "Yes." "And what are you prepared to offer if hearing that destabilizes him?" The question caught him off guard. "Legal assistance, a chance to review the material, control over whether—" "No," Maeve said. "Those are future processes. I mean in the hour after he hears you found something behind the wall of a house he lost." Cormac did not answer immediately. Maeve's expression did not harden. She simply waited. "I can give him space," he said at last. "That is a better beginning." She found Ansel's name in a closed case history, but would not confirm where he lived or worked. She agreed to deliver a short written message. Cormac drafted it 3 times. The first version contained too much technical information. The second sounded like a legal notice. The third was 6 lines. "My name is Cormac Varden. I purchased the former Marrow property in Morrowglass. During repairs, a sealed industrial recording module was found inside an office wall. It may relate to the winter test site accident. The original is being preserved through legal counsel. Nothing has been released publicly. I will not contact you again unless you choose to respond." He added a number and removed the sentence saying the material might help him. That was not yet a promise Cormac had the right to make. Maeve forwarded the message. Then nothing happened. 3 days passed. Cormac repaired 2 windows, installed insulated cable channels, and built the frame for the future workbench. He reviewed archive logs with Lenora and received another list of missing documents from Owen. He did not call Maeve. On the 4th morning, she called him. "He agreed to a meeting," she said. Cormac set down the voltage tester in his hand. "Where?" "A municipal bus maintenance depot outside Duluth. Public building, active staff, no reporters." "When?" "Tomorrow at 1. "Did he say anything else?" "Yes." Cormac waited. "He asked whether you were bringing the dog." Cormac looked toward Sable, who was standing by the door with snow melting along her paws. "What did you tell him?" "That it was his choice." "And?" "He said bring her." The drive north took them through open country where the snow had hardened into bright fields beneath a colorless sky. Sable rode in the rear seat, harness packed but not worn. Cormac had decided against the electronic detection patch. He did not want Ansel's first sight of her to feel like an operation. The bus depot stood beyond a row of warehouses near Duluth, its service bays facing a wide yard striped with plowed snow and tire tracks. Diesel fumes hung beneath the cold air. Inside, mechanics moved around raised buses while heaters pushed dry warmth through the building. Maeve waited near a glass-walled break room. She wore a blue-gray parka over a rust-colored sweater and carried the turquoise thermos by its handle. "He's in the rear bay," she said. "He can leave whenever he wants." "I understand." "Understanding it and making him feel it are different." Cormac nodded. Maeve looked down at Sable. The dog stood quietly beside him, wearing only her brown leather collar. "Good," Maeve said. "No uniform." They found Ansel beneath the rear of a city bus, tightening a bracket near the exhaust assembly. Only his boots and the legs of his faded black work trousers were visible at first. A rolling tool tray sat nearby. On it lay a wooden-handled screwdriver, worn smooth with age. Maeve stopped several feet away. "Ansel!" The movement beneath the bus ceased. A moment later, the man slid out on a mechanic's board. At 63, Ansel Marrow looked smaller than the figure the newspaper archives had created. He was lean, almost spare, with broad bones beneath a brown-gray work coat. His white-gray hair reached the back of his collar unevenly.
A short beard framed a long face and high cheekbones. His eyes were a pale, washed blue that moved first to Cormac's hands, then to Sable. He did not look at Maeve for reassurance. He looked at the exits. Sable noticed. She turned slightly sideways, lowering the direct line of her body without retreating. Ansel's gaze settled on the bent tip of her left ear. "Detection dog?" he asked. "Retired," Cormac said. "What kind?" "Electronic storage." Ansel looked at him then. Not surprise, recognition. "You let her search the house." "She alerted during repairs."
That wasn't my question. Cormac held his ground without closing the distance. Yes. Ansel wiped his hands on a gray cloth. The motion was careful, but the cloth remained clenched after his fingers were clean. How much did you open? The wall or the device? The device. I made a forensic image. The original is in controlled storage. How many files? Several partial audio fragments, connection logs, damaged metadata. Who has copies? Myself, Dr. Lenora Vossler, and legal counsel under restriction. Military? Not yet. Police? No. Press? No. Ansel's shoulders lowered by less than an inch. Maeve gestured toward the break room. We can sit. I'm working. The supervisor approved the hour. I didn't ask him to. No, Maeve said. I did. Ansel looked at her with irritation that lacked real heat. Then he picked up the wooden-handled screwdriver and placed it in the inside pocket of his coat. The break room had a vending machine, a row of metal lockers, and a table scarred by years of coffee cups and utility knives. Snowlight entered through a high window. Ansel chose the chair with the clearest view of both doors. Cormac sat opposite him. Maeve remained near the wall, rather than joining the table. Sable lay beside Cormac, but angled her body away from Ansel. Cormac placed no folder on the table. No photographs, no recorder. Ansel noticed that too. You said it may relate to the accident, he said. The label reads NW4. For the first time, Ansel lost control of his face. The change lasted only a second. His eyes closed slightly, his jaw tightened beneath the gray beard. Then the expression disappeared. Could mean anything. Reed Halverson identified it as the independent maintenance recorder. Reed identifies whatever keeps the room comfortable. He admitted seeing you carry a metal case from the control building. Ansel gave a dry laugh. There it is. What? The part where you arrive knowing enough to accuse and not enough to understand. I haven't accused you. You bought the house, opened the wall, copied the device, called experts, found old witnesses, and came across state lines. Men do not travel that far to remain neutral. Cormac felt the truth in the criticism. I came because the device was yours to explain before it became anyone else's story. Ansel's hand stopped moving around the shopcloth. You think saying that makes it true? No. Good. Cormac waited. The depot continued around them. Tools struck metal in the distant bays. An engine turned over, ran roughly, then went silent. Ansel looked at Sable. She still works doors? She checks thresholds. She waiting for your signal? Usually. Usually means no. Sable raised her head but did not look directly at him. Ansel's attention remained on the dog longer than on Cormac. Working dogs don't retire just because paperwork says so, he said. Neither do some men. Ansel's eyes returned to him. That line work well on other veterans? No. Then don't use it again. Cormac accepted the rebuke. He took out a single page from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. It contained only the technical summary Lenora had cleared for Ansel to see. Date ranges, recording format, the 4-tone interruption signal, and the fact that an order to continue followed in the recoverable sequence. Ansel did not touch it. Cormac said, The official report states no effective manual interruption occurred.
That report says many things. You know the signal? Ansel looked toward the window. No. Cormac watched his left hand. The fingers had tightened around the cloth again. He could have pressed. Instead, he folded the page and returned it to his pocket. I'm not going to force you to confirm anything today. Ansel's head turned sharply. Then why are you here? To make sure you know the module exists and that no one has released it.
You should have left it in the wall. The words came quietly. Cormac studied him. Why? Ansel stood so quickly that the chair legs scraped the floor. Maeve shifted her weight but did not step forward. Sable remained down. Ansel moved toward the window, breathing through his nose. His hands opened and closed once. Cormac recognized the effort, not from combat but from interview rooms, where men had learned to keep panic hidden because visible distress became evidence against them. Sable turned her head away from Ansel and lowered her muzzle to her paws. No stare, no approach, no command. The room changed because she refused to demand anything from him. Ansel noticed, his breathing slowed by degrees. She was trained to alert on drives? He asked without turning. Storage media, circuit components, memory cards. Even through walls? If scent escapes. Ansel rested one hand against the window frame. The seal failed. Cormac did not move. It was the first admission. Ansel looked back at him and understood immediately what he had given away. Cormac said, I'm not recording.
That doesn't make you harmless.
No. Ansel returned to the table but did not sit. He placed both hands on the chair back.
The unit was going to disappear, he said. Not officially. Officially, it had already been destroyed. After the accident? Before the first full inventory was signed. Who told you? I heard two managers talking near the auxiliary station. They said the rack fire had solved the record problem. What record problem? The main network had dropped. NW4 had not. Cormac kept his voice level. You removed the module. I took government property from a secured site. That isn't the same question. It is the only wording they cared about. Ansel finally sat. He told the story without drama. After the accident, the facility entered lockdown. Staff were separated and interviewed. Ansel knew the auxiliary recorder had captured traffic during the network outage. He also knew the official inventory would list the unit as destroyed. During a shift change, he removed the storage module from the damaged rack and placed it inside a maintenance case. He took it home with the intention of copying the data and delivering it to an investigator outside the program's command structure. Why not go directly to the board? Cormac asked. Because the board was not independent yet. It was the same people choosing what evidence the future board would receive. Ansel had connected the module to a homemade interface in the office. He managed one incomplete copy before security officers arrived at his house with an equipment recovery order. He hid the module in the wall through an old conduit opening. The officers searched the workbench, cabinets, attic, basement, and vehicle. They found cables, adapters, and fragments of a copied directory, but not the module. They knew you had taken something. They knew inventory did not match. What happened next? Ansel's eyes moved to the high window. I was told possession alone could become theft of restricted equipment, obstruction, mishandling controlled material. Were you charged? No. What did they want? A statement. Cormac said nothing. Ansel explained that a military-appointed attorney advised him to sign a limited acknowledgement. It stated that he had failed to fully document one verification step in the hours before the test. That was true? Cormac asked. I entered the result into a local worksheet and did not transfer it to the central log before the system went down. Was the check performed? Yes. Was there a problem? Yes. Did you report it? Ansel stared at him. That is the part your recording may answer. Cormac thought of the warning voice, the stop command, the 4 tones. What did you think the statement would be used for? Internal procedure review. And instead?
they pulled one sentence out of it. Failure to document became failure to verify. Failure to verify became failure to respond. Why didn't you challenge it? Ansel laughed once, without humor. You think I did not? I'm asking. I filed objections. My access disappeared. My assigned counsel changed. Every request came back needing a different form or another authorization. Then they showed me Dorian's preliminary statement. The name altered the room. Cormac leaned slightly forward. Dorian Kells. Ansel nodded. He had missed one confirmation step. He was exhausted, his partner was sick. He had been sleeping in hospital chairs and coming to work because the contractor had no replacement. Did his error cause the accident? No, the answer came immediately. How do you know? Because I caught it. Cormac felt the chapter of history shift beneath that sentence. Ansel continued before he could respond. I stopped the sequence. The safety desk agreed. The system should have remained on hold. Then someone ordered it resumed. Ansel's face closed. I said enough! Who gave the order? I said enough. Cormac stopped. The older man's breathing had begun to shorten again. Sable remained where she was, one paw resting near the front of Cormac's boot. Ansel looked down at her. She doesn't push? No. Most dogs trained for evidence push toward the source. She learned another use for stillness. From you? Cormac looked at Sable. No, probably despite me. Something almost softened in Ansel's expression. It vanished quickly. When they showed me Dorian's statement, he said, they made it clear there could be two failures or one. You let them choose you. I let them keep looking at me. Why? Because Dorian was already breaking. Because his partner needed medical coverage. Because I thought I could survive being hated by people I didn't respect. Ansel looked toward the depot doors. I underestimated how many people I still wanted to respect me. No one spoke for several seconds. Cormac understood then why every easy version of the story failed. Ansel had not simply been framed by a single powerful man. He had been pressured, misrepresented, and cornered. But he had also made a choice. He had accepted silence because he believed he could control its cost. The cost had outlived the reason. Why didn't you retrieve the module later? Cormac asked. I tried, once. When? After I lost access to the property. The bank had already taken it? Not yet. There was a restraining order tied to the equipment case. Then the house was searched again. After that, the wall had been repaired. You thought they found it? I thought either they found it or the damage finished it. Ansel's eyes narrowed. And then the house became the only thing I still owned. Until it wasn't. Cormac did not ask about the years between, not yet. He could see them in the condition of Ansel's coat, in the careful way he folded the shop cloth, in the fact that a skilled systems technician now repaired buses by the hour and watched every doorway. I can arrange for you to hear the files, Cormac said, with Lenora and Evelyn present. No publication, no press. Ansel shook his head. You want me to hear myself? We have not identified your voice. You think that protects me? It protects the truth. No, it protects your process. Cormac let the criticism stand. Ansel rose again, more slowly this time. I am not going back tomorrow, Glass, to stand under lights while people discover they were wrong about me. No one asked you to. They will. I won't. You cannot promise what happens after the record moves. No, Cormac said, but I can promise not to move it without telling you. Ansel studied him. Cormac understood that this was the point where men in stories offered redemption, justice, a restored name. He offered none of those. The decision is yours, he said. Ansel looked toward Maeve. She gave no advice. Then he looked at Sable. The dog had closed her eyes, though one ear remained turned toward him. At last, Ansel said, I'll listen. Cormac did not respond too quickly. Under what conditions?
Vossler controls the files. Quaid handles the legal side. No local station. No military office in the room. That can be arranged. And nothing is released before we find Dorian. Cormac held his gaze. You know where he is? No. Why does he have to be found first? Ansel's answer came quietly, because one piece of that recording may clear my name by destroying his. Cormac felt the temptation to ask more. He did not. Ansel moved toward the door. Sable stood but did not follow. Before leaving, he stopped beside her. He did not reach for her head. Instead, he lowered one hand and held it several inches away. Sable sniffed once, then placed her paw near the toe of his worn black boot.
Ansel looked down at the small distance between them. Not contact. Permission. He straightened and walked back toward the service bay. Cormac remained in the break room after the door closed. Maeve lifted her turquoise thermos. You did better than I expected. That sounds like a low standard. It was. Cormac looked through the glass as Ansel slid beneath the bus again. Within moments, only his boots were visible. He told us enough to change the case. Maeve shook her head. He told you enough to change your responsibility. Cormac looked at her. He is not evidence with a pulse, she said. Remember that when the recording starts giving you what you want. On the drive back toward Wisconsin, Sable slept in the rear seat. Cormac replayed none of the audio. For the first time since opening the wall, the hidden module felt less like an object waiting to be solved, and more like a burden that already belonged to several people. Ansel had agreed to hear it.
That was not consent to publication. It was not forgiveness. It was not a request to be rescued. It was only a man who had spent years losing control of his own story, choosing for 1 hour to take hold of its edge again. And before Cormac could ask the truth to do anything for Ansel, they would have to find the man Ansel had once allowed it to remain silent for. Dorian Hale Kells lived where the road narrowed beside a winter ferry channel in northern Michigan. The ferry itself did not carry passengers at that time of year. Ice had closed most of the route, leaving only a maintenance vessel operating between the mainland dock and a small utility station across the water. The terminal buildings stood low against the wind, their roofs edged with frozen spray, and their windows facing a gray lake broken by moving strips of dark water. Cormac parked beside a service shed shortly before noon. Ansel had spoken little during the drive. He sat in the passenger seat, wearing his brown-gray work coat, one hand resting inside the pocket where he kept the old, wooden-handled screwdriver. He had agreed to come only after Evelyn confirmed that Dorian had chosen the location and understood who would be present. Sable rode behind them without her detection harness. Evelyn arrived separately in a dark rental car. Her silver bob was neat despite the wind, and a burgundy document case hung from one hand. She greeted Ansel without asking how he felt about returning to the past. That helped. The conversation is voluntary, she said. Anyone may stop it. Nothing becomes part of a legal filing unless the speaker reviews and signs it afterward. Ansel looked toward the service building. And the others? Lenora and Owen will join through a secure connection. Audio only unless Dorian requests video. No recording? Not until everyone agrees. Ansel nodded once. Cormac understood the gesture was not trust. It was acceptance of a structure Ansel had helped define. Inside, the terminal smelled of metal, wet rope, old coffee, and the dry heat of industrial radiators. A waiting room had been converted into a temporary meeting space. Someone had pushed 2 tables together beneath a window overlooking the frozen channel. Dorian stood near the far wall. He was 58, shorter than Ansel and heavier through the middle, with a broad forehead and a face that seemed built to reveal emotions he would rather conceal. His brown-gray hair was cut plainly. A thin salt and pepper beard followed his jaw, and black-framed glasses rested low on his nose. He wore a dark blue technical jacket over a gray sweatshirt. One reflective strip crossed each shoulder, catching the weak daylight whenever he moved. Cormac noticed the first thing Dorian looked at was not Ansel, it was Sable. Then his gaze moved to Ansel and stopped. Neither man offered a hand. "Hello, Dorian," Ansel said. Dorian removed his glasses and wiped them with a cloth, though the lenses were clean. "You came. You asked for me." "No, I agreed to you." The distinction was small and deliberate. Ansel accepted it. Evelyn placed her document case on the table. Cormac connected the secure laptop and Lenora's voice came through the speaker first. "Can everyone hear me?" Owen followed.
Yes. His tone carried the same disciplined impatience Cormac remembered from their earlier calls. Dorian sat facing the window. Ansel chose a chair across from him, but not directly opposite. Cormac remained near the end of the table. Sable lay in the open space between the two men. No one had positioned her there. She chose the place where neither man could look at the other without also seeing her. Evelyn began. "We are here to establish what each person directly observed, what can be supported by technical records, and what remains uncertain. We will not assign criminal responsibility in this room." Dorian's fingers tightened around the cloth. "What about personal responsibility?" "That can be acknowledged," Evelyn said. "It cannot be forced." Dorian looked toward Ansel. "I missed the secondary verification." There was no introduction, no gradual approach. The sentence entered the room and stayed there. Ansel's expression did not change. Cormac had expected anger, accusation, perhaps relief at hearing the admission aloud. What appeared instead was exhaustion, the expression of a man hearing a fact he had already carried through too many winters. Dorian continued. The stability sensor had returned inconsistent values during the morning checks. The first run passed. The second showed a lag. I was supposed to perform a manual comparison against the calibration reference. "You didn't," Owen said through the speaker. "No." "Why?" Dorian put his glasses back on. "I had been awake most of 3 nights. My partner, Elias, was receiving treatment in Marquette. I drove there after shift and came back before morning. The contractor had frozen overtime and would not bring in another verifier." "That explains condition," Owen said. "It does not remove responsibility." "I know." Dorian's voice quickened. "I signed the automatic verification result because the first reading had passed and because the simulated model showed the second lag was probably environmental. I told myself I would return to it before final sequence." "Did you?" Cormac asked. "No." Ansel spoke for the first time. "I did." Dorian looked at him. Ansel leaned back slightly, his hands resting flat on his knees. "I saw the mismatch in the local worksheet. I asked where the manual comparison was." "You didn't ask," Dorian said. "You knew." "I asked because the room had other people in it." Dorian lowered his eyes. Lenora's voice came through the speaker. "We have a fragment in which one speaker identifies an unstable response. We need to establish whether that occurred before or after Mr. Marrow reviewed the worksheet." "After," Dorian said. Ansel repeated the test. The lag increased. "And then?" Owen asked. "He entered a hold." "The 4-tone interruption?" "Yes." Ansel's gaze moved toward the laptop. "I activated the manual sequence stop at engineering control." Owen asked, "Did you have authority?" "For an immediate technical hold, yes." "Permanent cancellation?" "No. That required the safety desk or program authority." Dorian rubbed his thumb along the edge of the cleaning cloth. "Caleb Kroll was at the safety station. He confirmed the hold." The name changed to the air. Cormac thought of Miriam standing beside her brother's old microphone. "Did Caleb agree the system was unsafe?" he asked. "He said the values required another full calibration," Dorian replied. "He requested a weather delay as well." Ansel turned toward him. "You remember his exact wording?" "I remember because it was the last time anyone in that room spoke as if procedure still mattered." Silence followed. Sable shifted, stretching one front paw across the floor. Lenora played a short audio fragment through the secure system. Static moved beneath a distant mechanical hum. A man's voice said, "Hold remains until stability reference is repeated." Then another voice,
closer but damaged, answered, "Safety concurs." Lenora stopped the clip. "Mr. Kells," she said, "do you identify either speaker?" Dorian's mouth tightened. "The first is Ansel." Ansel looked toward the window. "The second is Caleb Crowell." "Confidence?" Lenora asked. "I worked with both of them for 4 years." "That is not a percentage." Dorian almost smiled, but the expression failed. "Hi." Lenora explained that she had compared the voices with training recordings from the station archive and public safety presentations. Acoustic characteristics supported Dorian's identification, though the damage prevented an absolute conclusion. Owen asked for the event sequence. Dorian described a meeting held after the hold was entered. The safety team wanted the test postponed. Ansel requested a hardware inspection. The contractor's flight control lead argued that the instability existed only in a local sensor path and would not affect the primary system. Then the program manager entered the room. Dorian did not name him. Evelyn noticed. "You may use the position rather than the name," she said. The program manager said the sponsors were already reviewing whether to cancel the next funding phase. He said the aircraft had passed simulation and the demonstration could proceed under program authority. "Could he override the technical hold?" Owen asked. "He could request release," Ansel said. "The safety desk had to accept it." "Did Caleb accept it?" "No." Dorian removed his glasses again. "They changed the release path." Cormac leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "The hold had been entered through engineering control and confirmed through safety. The restart should have required both stations. Instead, program authority transferred the sequence to the contractor's alternate control channel." Owen's voice sharpened. "Was that permitted?" "For limited ground testing," Ansel said, "not for a full demonstration launch." "Do you have documentation?" Dorian stood. For a moment, Cormac thought he was ending the meeting. Instead, Dorian crossed to a metal locker beside the vending machines. He removed a canvas tool bag, opened the bottom compartment, and took out a thin plastic folder warped by years of cold and heat. Ansel stared at it. "You kept them?" Dorian returned to the table. "I kept what I could." Inside were photocopied maintenance worksheets, a handwritten shift log, and 2 pages of procedure revisions marked with old contractor stamps. Several lines were highlighted in faded yellow. Dorian pushed the folder toward Ansel, but stopped before releasing it. "I should have sent these to you." "When?" "Any time in the last 24 years. Ansel's face remained still. "That is a large appointment window." Dorian flinched. Evelyn reached for the documents only after Dorian nodded permission. She photographed each page and entered them into a temporary evidence log. Owen reviewed the images through the secure link. "This revision states alternate channel control was limited to stationary calibration," he said. "If authentic, it supports the argument that the restart exceeded approved procedure." "It's authentic," Dorian said. Owen did not soften. "That will be determined." Dorian sat again. His words came faster now, as though the folder had removed the last structure holding them back. After the accident, investigators separated the technical staff. Dorian admitted missing the manual verification. He also stated that Ansel found the error, repeated the test, and stopped the sequence. His first draft included all of it. The statement he later signed did not. "They told me the part about the override was outside my direct responsibility," Dorian said. "They said the board would obtain command testimony separately." "Did it?" Cormac asked. "I don't know." Ansel did. "No." Everyone looked at him. The final summary used Dorian's missed check and my incomplete log entry. It did not include the alternate channel restart. Dorian's hands began to shake. "I saw what they were doing." Ansel's voice remained quiet. "Yes. I called you. You did. I asked you not to release the copy." Cormac felt the center of the story turn. Until that moment, Dorian's silence could still have been understood as fear after the fact. Now it had a shape, a request, and a person who had agreed to it. Dorian looked at Ansel across the space where Sable lay. Elias had been told his treatment coverage might change if I lost the contractor plan. We had no savings left. I thought if the board focused on the missed check, I could lose my license, my job, everything. So you asked Ansel to wait, Evelyn said. I asked him to give me time. How much?
Dorian looked down. I did not say. Ansel's jaw tightened. You said until Elias stabilized. He never did.
The words came out smaller than the rest. Dorian's partner had died 11 months after the accident. By then, Ansel's statement had already been used against him. His objections had been denied. The public narrative had settled around his name. You could have spoken after Elias died, Ansel said. I know. You could have spoken when I lost my clearance. I know. When I lost the work. I know. When the first newspaper called me a coward. Dorian's breathing changed. I know. No, Ansel said. You know the list. That is not the same as knowing the years. Sable lifted her head. She did not rise. Dorian gripped the edge of the table. I thought speaking later would only prove I had lied earlier. It would have. I thought they would turn on me and leave the report unchanged. They might have. I thought you thought silence still belonged to you. Dorian stopped.
Ansel's voice had not risen, but anger finally stood plainly inside it.
It didn't. Once you asked me to carry it, it belonged to both of us. Dorian closed his eyes. Cormac understood why Ansel had insisted they find him before releasing anything. The recording was not merely evidence of an order. It was the surviving edge of an agreement between two frightened men. One asking for time, the other believing strength meant absorbing damage without limit. Sable rose and turned once before lying down again, this time with her back toward the laptop and her head between Ansel and Dorian. No allegiance, no judgment. Only a living boundary inside a room where every person wanted the past to choose one side. Cormac looked at Ansel. You could have released the copy without Dorian's consent. Yes, why didn't you? Ansel looked at the dog rather than at him. Because I gave my word. Dorian opened his eyes. You kept it longer than I deserved. That does not make keeping it right. It was the first time Ansel admitted his own responsibility without being asked. The room grew quieter. He continued. I told myself the families already had an official answer. I told myself reopening it would not bring anyone back. I told myself I was protecting Dorian. He looked toward the frozen channel. The truth is, after a while, silence also protected me from finding out whether anyone would believe me. Dorian's voice broke slightly. I let them make you the whole cause. You let them, and you let them continue, Ansel turned back. Yes. The word held no defense. Cormac had expected the discovery of the recording to divide guilt more accurately. Instead, it revealed how guilt had been distributed through fear, loyalty, procedure, exhaustion, and self-preservation until no one person could hold the entire map. The program management had protected funding. Ansel had protected Dorian. Dorian had protected his partner and himself. Reed had protected his job. The investigators had protected the integrity of a report already moving toward completion. Each silence had made the next silence easier. Owen broke the pause. The technical question is becoming clearer. The ethical question is not mine to settle. Evelyn closed the temporary evidence log. We need to decide what happens now. Dorian sat straighter. I'll sign a new statement. Ansel looked at him. I will include the missed verification, the hold, Caleb's concurrence, the alternate channel restart, and my request that Ansel delay disclosure. You understand that may affect your professional record, Evelyn said. Yes. It may attract public attention. I know. Ansel's expression hardened. No. Dorian stared at him. No? I will not clear my name by placing yours where mine was. I am responsible for part of it. For part. I let you carry all of it. So the answer is not to carry it back alone. Dorian removed his glasses and set them carefully on the table.
What do you want me to do?
Ansel looked almost angry at the question. Tell exactly what happened. That is what I'm offering. No. You're offering yourself as payment. Dorian's shoulders dropped. For the first time, the two men seemed less like accuser and accused than survivors of the same bad decision made for different reasons. Evelyn opened a clean legal pad. Then we separate the issues, she said. Mr. Marrow's petition will request correction of his individual service record based on omitted evidence and inaccurate characterization of his actions. She wrote as she spoke. A parallel request will seek review of the accident's systemic findings, the failed verification, the valid hold, the safety concurrence, the alternate control path, and the command decision. Owen added, do not name a dead officer as the sole cause unless the records support it. The structure matters more than finding a replacement scapegoat.
Lenora said, the public release, if any, should use only authenticated portions. Technical material and private medical circumstances must remain protected. Dorian looked at Ansel. And my statement? You tell the truth, Ansel said. All of it, including that I asked you for time after Elias died, and you never gave me an answer. Dorian nodded slowly. And including that you agreed to wait. Yes. Neither man looked relieved. Relief would have been dishonest. They were only replacing a simple lie with a difficult record. By late afternoon, the wind had strengthened across the lake. Ice shifted near the ferry channel with a low, distant groan. Dorian signed authorization for Evelyn to copy the maintenance documents. He did not sign his final statement yet. That would be prepared, reviewed, corrected, and signed later without the pressure of the room.
Lenora confirmed that the surviving voice characteristics strongly supported Ansel as the speaker ordering the hold and Caleb as the safety officer concurring. Owen confirmed that Dorian's documents, if authenticated, showed the system returned to active status only after an alternate command authorization. The evidence did not prove every motive, it established sequence. Before leaving, Dorian stood beside the window with Ansel. Cormac remained far enough away not to hear everything. He saw Dorian take an old pocket watch from inside his jacket. He held it in his palm while speaking. Ansel did not touch it. After a moment, Dorian put the watch away. They did not embrace, they did not shake hands. Ansel returned to the table and picked up his coat. When do we file? He asked Evelyn. When you are ready. I won't be. That was not the question. Ansel glanced at Cormac. Marrowglass will hear about the petition. Eventually. Miriam Crow will hear before the town does.
Cormac understood. You want to tell her?
No. Ansel looked through the terminal doors toward the winter road. I want to be present when she is told. It was not a desire to be honored. It was not forgiveness. It was the acceptance that his silence had not only injured him. Other people had built their grief around it. Cormac asked, You'll return to Marrowglass? Ansel took several seconds to answer. Yes. Dorian looked up. Ansel did not turn toward him. Not for a ceremony, he said. Not for cameras. And not so anyone can decide I was a hero instead of a coward. What for? Dorian asked. Ansel opened the door. Cold air entered the room. To stop letting people argue with a version of me that never existed. Sable rose and followed Cormac into the wind. Behind them, Dorian remained inside the terminal, standing beside the table where his records, his failure, and his testimony had finally been placed in the same light.
Ahead, Ansel walked toward the car without waiting for anyone. For 24 years, 3 men had carried different parts of one silence. Ansel, Dorian, and the absent authority whose order survived only in damaged sound. Now the silence had been broken. Not by a confession, by the harder decision to leave no one carrying the whole blame alone. Snow began falling before Marrowglass appeared beyond the trees. It was not a storm. The flakes came down slowly,
bright in the morning light, settling on road signs and pine branches without obscuring anything. The town looked almost untouched beneath them. Ansel sat beside Cormac in the truck, wearing a brown wool coat over a faded blue-gray work shirt. He had trimmed his beard before leaving Michigan, not closely, not enough to suggest preparation for an appearance, but enough that Cormac noticed. Sable rested in the rear seat. As they passed the town sign, Ansel looked toward the frozen lake and then away. "Different?" Cormac asked. "No." The answer came too quickly. Cormac did not challenge it. Marrow Glass had changed in practical ways. The old diner had become a pharmacy. A row of storage buildings stood where contractor trailers once lined the access road. The Winter Test Facilities Administrative Building now housed municipal offices and a small vocational program. But memory did not measure time by buildings. Ansel watched the streets as if each corner still held the exact version of him that had once crossed it under other people's eyes. They passed the hardware store. Reed's truck was parked near the side entrance. Ansel noticed. "He knew we were coming," Cormac said. "That has never been the same as being ready." A woman shoveling snow outside a bakery looked up as the truck slowed. Her gaze moved from Cormac to Ansel and stayed there. Recognition came gradually. Her shovel stopped. Ansel turned toward the windshield. No one approached them when they parked near the radio station. No one shouted. There was no crowd waiting for the disgraced man's return. That made the attention more difficult to dismiss. Across the square, two men beside a delivery van looked over and then lowered their voices. An older woman leaving the library stood still beneath the awning. A driver passed twice before continuing toward the lake road. Ansel opened the truck door. "Still time to leave," Cormac said. Ansel stepped down into the snow. "That sentence gets less useful every time you say it." WMGL Community Radio looked exactly as Cormac remembered it. Old brick, narrow windows, the white antenna rising behind the roof. Miriam Crowell waited in the main studio. She wore a dark red sweater beneath her navy coat. The silver microphone that had belonged to her brother stood between two chairs at the center table. When Ansel entered, Miriam did not offer her hand. He did not appear to expect one. For several seconds they looked at each other without speaking. Cormac remained near the control room window. Evelyn sat at the far end of the table with her burgundy case closed. Lenora joined through a secure audio link, but the speaker had not yet been activated. Sable lay beside the studio wall. Miriam gestured toward the chair opposite her. Ansel sat. "You look older," she said. "So do you." It could have sounded cruel. It did not. It sounded like the only obvious truth neither had to verify. Miriam rested one hand near the microphone. "I heard the authenticated sections yesterday." Ansel looked toward Evelyn. "She was authorized to hear them," Evelyn said. "I know," Miriam continued. "I recognize Caleb." Ansel lowered his eyes. The recording had preserved only a few seconds of her brother's voice clearly enough for identification. "Safety concurs. Hold remains active." A small sentence. 24 years of grief had leaned on the belief that Caleb's warning had been ignored by Ansel. The recording showed that Ansel had entered the hold and Caleb had supported it. They had not been on opposite sides. Miriam asked, "Did he speak to you after the sequence was restarted?" "Yes." "What did he say?" Ansel did not answer immediately. "He said the alternate channel should never have been used for a live launch." "Anything else?" "He told me to document the override separately." "Did you?" "I tried." Miriam's jaw tightened. "You hid the recorder?" "Yes." "You kept the evidence?" "Yes." "And then you said nothing." Ansel looked up. "I filed objections." "That is not the same as telling the families." "I was under restriction." "For 24 years?" "No." The answer changed the room. Cormac saw Miriam's fingers press harder against the edge of the desk. Ansel continued before she could speak. "Not for 24 years. Later, I was afraid, then angry, then ashamed that I had waited. Every year made speaking look more like an excuse. Miriam stared at him. You let us believe Caleb warned you and you ignored him. I did not know that was the version you had. You lived 5 blocks from my mother. I did. She crossed the street when she saw you. I remember. And you never stopped her. Ansel's expression hardened, but not against Miriam, against himself. What would I have said? The truth! I no longer knew which part anyone would believe. You could have tried. Yes. The word came without qualification. Miriam turned toward the studio window. Snow moved past the glass. The square beyond it looked calm enough to belong to another town. My mother died believing her son had been ignored by a careless man, she said. Ansel's face changed. Not dramatically. His eyes closed once and reopened. I cannot repair that. No, I am sorry. Miriam looked back at him. Do not apologize because you think that is what this room needs. I am not. Then what are you apologizing for? For leaving your family alone with a false answer after I knew it was false. The distinction mattered. Miriam heard it. She did not forgive him, but she stopped asking questions as if he were still the man described in the old reports. Cormac activated the secure speaker and Lenora joined them. She explained which voices had been authenticated, where the sequence remained incomplete, and why the full recording could not be broadcast. Miriam listened without interrupting. When Lenora finished, Miriam asked, Can we state that Ansel ordered the test stopped? We can state that the voice strongly identified as Mr. Marrow initiated the manual interruption, Lenora replied. Technical records and witness statements support that identification. And Caleb? Strongly identified as confirming the safety hold. Can we state who ordered the restart? Not by name with the evidence currently available. Miriam looked at Ansel. Then that is what we say. Not everything. Only what could withstand being repeated. The community meeting was held that evening in the old municipal hall. Thomas Pell Avery had arranged the chairs in a wide oval rather than rows facing a stage. He was 67, thin and slightly stooped, with white hair combed carefully to one side and tortoiseshell glasses low on his nose. A former county judge, Thomas had the quiet authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice to make a room notice when it had crossed a line. There were no cameras, no live broadcast. Evelyn had insisted that every attendee agree to confidentiality until the legal petition was filed. Miriam invited representatives from the affected families, former workers from the test facility, town officials, and 2 members of the Veterans Fund. Not everyone came. Some refused because they believed the meeting insulted the dead. Others said Ansel was returning only to sue the town. One family sent a letter stating that no new report could improve what had already been lost. Thomas began by placing a small wooden gavel on the table. This is not a trial, he said. No verdict will be issued here. No one is required to forgive, apologize, or accept an interpretation before the evidence supports it. His hands remained flat on the table. We are here because the official account may have omitted facts that changed how responsibility was assigned. Miriam sat near the microphone stand brought from the station, though the microphone itself was not connected. Ansel sat beside Cormac. Sable lay near the doorway where she could see the full room. Evelyn described the legal limits. Lenora presented the authenticated audio sequence. Owen joined by secure video and explained the technical structure. Dorian's missed check, Ansel's valid hold, Caleb's concurrence, and the alternate channel restart. A mistake occurred before the hold, Owen said. The evidence also indicates that the mistake was detected before the test resumed. Those are separate facts. A man near the far wall folded his arms. My brother died in that building. Are you saying no one is responsible? No, Owen replied. I am saying responsibility cannot be accurately assigned if the report excludes the decision that returned the system to operation. Dorian appeared on a monitor at the front of the room. He wore a charcoal jacket and pale blue shirt. His black-framed glasses caught the light from his small office in Michigan. He read from a statement Evelyn had reviewed. He admitted missing the manual of verification. He described Ansel discovering the discrepancy, repeating the check, and stopping the test. He confirmed Caleb Crowell's agreement with the hold. He also acknowledged asking Ansel to delay releasing the recording because he feared losing his employment and medical coverage for Elias. Dorian did not ask the families to understand. He did not say he had suffered too. He ended with one sentence. I allowed the official account to place consequences on Mr. Marrow that I knew did not belong to him alone. Ansel stared at the table. Reed stood next. He wore his blue-gray garage jacket and held the same shop rag he had used during his first conversation with Cormac. He turned it once between his hands before speaking. I saw Ansel leave the control building with a metal case, he said. I did not know what was inside. A woman across from him asked, Why didn't you report it? I was afraid. Of what? Losing my job? Losing the insurance my wife needed? Being pulled into the investigation? The woman's expression did not soften. So you stayed quiet? Yes. Reed looked toward Ansel. And later, when people said they knew what he had done, I let my silence sound like agreement. The meeting did not become peaceful after that. It became honest enough to be difficult. A former contractor argued that Ansel had still stolen equipment. Another person said the entire effort was an attempt to transfer blame onto men who were dead and unable to defend themselves. A relative of one victim asked why Dorian should be trusted now when he had waited so long. Thomas allowed each question, but stopped accusations presented as facts. Then a broad-shouldered man in the third chair turned toward Ansel. You lied for 24 years. Ansel looked at him. I withheld the truth. That is lying. Yes. The admission did not satisfy the man. You expect us to believe you were some kind of hero who tried to stop everything? No. Then why are you here? Ansel's hand closed around the edge of his chair. To correct what is wrong. You stole government equipment. You hid it in your wall. You let families believe you were guilty. Now you walk in here with lawyers and want your name cleaned? I did not ask for this meeting. You came. Ansel stood. The movement was abrupt enough that several people shifted in their chairs. He reached for his coat. Cormac did not stop him. Neither did Thomas. Ansel crossed toward the doorway. Sable lay beside it. When he approached, she lifted her head. That was all. She did not rise. She did not block the exit. Her tail remained still against the floor. Ansel stopped because stepping around her required a choice. He looked down at the bent tip of her left ear, then through the open doorway toward the empty hall. Behind him, no one spoke. Cormac understood that silence could now serve two opposite purposes. It could push Ansel out by confirming that the room had already judged him, or it could leave him space to decide. Sable lowered her head again. Ansel turned around. He did not return to his original seat. He chose an empty chair closer to the wall. Thomas waited until he sat before continuing. The act was small enough that no one praised it. That was why it mattered. Ansel stayed because he chose to remain in a room where people were still angry with him. Later, Miriam addressed the group. The station will not broadcast the complete recording, she said. Some portions remain legally restricted. Some involve private information. Some are too damaged to represent honestly. A man asked, Then what are you going to tell people? What has been verified? She looked toward Ansel. That Ansel Marrow initiated a manual stop after a system irregularity was identified. That Caleb Crowell supported the safety hold. That the test resumed through an alternate control path. That the old reports did not include all of those facts. And the rest? We will say the review continues. Miriam's voice remained steady. We will also say this station repeated a version of the accident that placed responsibility more narrowly than the available evidence now supports. Cormac watched the people around the oval. Some looked relieved, some offended, some only tired. A town could issue a correction. It could amend an archive and rewrite a broadcast. It could not feel remorse as one body. Only individuals could do that, and each one would arrive at it, or refuse it, on a different day. 2 mornings later, Evelyn received confirmation that the Navy's Board for Correction of Military Records had formally accepted Ansel's petition for review.
The board had also agreed that the authenticated recording and supporting maintenance documents were substantial enough to suspend reliance on the disputed conclusion while the case was evaluated. It was not a reversal, not yet. The original finding remained in the file, but it no longer stood uncontested as the final word. Evelyn read the notice aloud at Cormac's kitchen table. Ansel stood by the rear office doorway. "What does suspension mean?" he asked. "It means the old conclusion cannot be treated as fully reliable while the new evidence is reviewed." "How long?" "Months, possibly longer. So nothing has changed." Evelyn closed the letter. "Something has changed. The government is no longer permitted to behave as if there is nothing to review." Ansel considered that. He did not smile. After Evelyn left, he walked into the rear office for the first time since returning to Marrowglass. The room had changed. Cormac's workbench stood along one wall. New cable channels ran neatly beneath the windows. The section where the module had been found remained open, the temporary panel leaning nearby. Ansel stopped before the cavity. "It was smaller," he said. "The opening?" "The room." Cormac understood. Places remembered through shame often expanded until they seemed capable of containing entire lives. Sable entered and lay beneath the workbench. Cormac handed Ansel a screwdriver. Together they measured the opening and cut a permanent access panel from finished wood. Ansel worked without explaining his method. His hands remembered the house better than his eyes wanted to. They installed small hinges and a recessed lock. When the panel closed, it aligned with the wall but did not disappear into it. Cormac tested the latch. "Some things need protection," he said. Ansel ran his thumb along the edge of the new door. "Protection is not the same as burial." Outside, the late afternoon snow had stopped. Sunlight reflected from Winnecove Lake and entered through the office windows, reaching the wall that had once held the hidden recorder. Ansel placed the screwdriver on the bench. He did not ask for the house back. He did not search for old belongings or stand in the rooms waiting for the past to recognize him. He only looked at the small, locked panel. For years, the truth had survived because he concealed it. Now it would have to survive because people agreed to handle it carefully in the open. By the time the snow began withdrawing from the southern edge of Winnecove Lake, the house no longer sounded empty. The changes were small. A soldering station clicked on each morning in the rear office. Shelves held labeled radios, damaged drives, field recorders, and boxes of cables waiting to be sorted. The furnace still complained when the temperature dropped after dark, but now its noise belonged to a working place rather than an abandoned one. Cormac had completed 3 restoration jobs for veterans in neighboring counties. One involved a damaged voice recorder containing messages from a man's late brother. Another was a corrupted hard drive filled mostly with tax documents and one folder of photographs the owner had believed lost. The third was an old shortwave radio whose repair had cost more time than the device was worth. Cormac had accepted all 3. Sable spent most mornings beneath the workbench. Her gray-blue detection harness hung on the wall beside the door, clean but seldom used. Outside, the snowbanks had collapsed into rough white ridges streaked with pine needles and road grit. Dark water appeared near the reeds along the lake's edge. Winter was ending unevenly, surrendering one patch at a time. The Federal Review had moved with the opposite rhythm. Nothing seemed to change until a letter arrived proving that something already had. Evelyn brought it herself. She came to the house on a pale March morning, wearing a charcoal coat and carrying her burgundy document case. Owen joined by secure video from his study. Lenora had submitted her final authentication report the week before and remained available by telephone. Ansel stood near the kitchen window rather than taking a chair. He had been living in transitional housing outside Marrowglass for 6 weeks. Maeve had arranged the placement in a converted brick building with 12 small apartments, a shared laundry room, and no requirement that residents describe their past before receiving a key. Ansel disliked the hallway lights, the thin walls, and the resident coordinator's habit of asking whether he had eaten. He had not left. That counted as progress, though no one used the word around him. Evelyn opened the case and removed a formal envelope. "The Board for Correction of Naval Records has issued an interim determination," she said. Ansel looked at the envelope. Interim? Yes. So not final. Not on the broader accident review. Cormac poured coffee but did not hand anyone a cup until they asked. Sable lifted her head from beside the radiator. Evelyn unfolded the letter. The board had concluded that the original record contained a material omission. The newly authenticated audio, maintenance documentation, witness statements, and procedure revisions established that Ansel had identified an instability condition, performed a repeat check, and initiated a valid manual hold before the test resumed. The old finding that he had knowingly ignored warning data was no longer supportable. The line was written in administrative language, careful enough to appear almost reluctant. Ansel heard it without moving. Evelyn continued. The personal responsibility conclusion would be removed from his service record. Any characterization suggesting deliberate disregard of safety procedure would be withdrawn. His eligibility for certain benefits lost after the adverse finding would be reconsidered separately. The broader questions remained open. Who authorized the alternate control path? Whether the program structure violated existing safety rules? Why contrary evidence had not appeared in the final report? The board referred those issues for continued review. When Evelyn finished, the room remained quiet. Cormac had expected Ansel to ask for the letter. He did not. "What exactly changes today?" Ansel said. "Your official record no longer states that you intentionally ignored the warning," Evelyn replied. "And the newspapers?" "Not automatically." "The town archives?" "No." "The years?" Evelyn closed the folder. "No." Ansel looked back through the window. Snow melt dripped steadily from the porch roof. Cormac understood the disappointment because it did not resemble disappointment. Ansel had lived too long under the old conclusion to believe one corrected file could reach backward and alter every room he had already entered. Owen's voice came from the laptop. "A limited correction is still a correction." Ansel turned. "You spent your career writing reports. You know how long one sentence can live after the people who wrote it are gone." "I do." "Then you know the wrong sentence already won." Owen removed his reading glasses. "No. It arrived first." Ansel's expression tightened. Owen continued, "That is not the same as winning." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Ansel crossed the kitchen and took the letter from Evelyn. He read the key paragraph once, then again. His thumb stopped beneath the words, "knowingly ignored warning data." Cormac watched the man's face for relief and saw something more difficult. The exhaustion of finally setting down a weight after carrying it so long that the body had forgotten how to stand without it. Ansel folded the letter along its original crease. "Who else receives this?" "The appropriate records offices," Evelyn said. "You may authorize release to local institutions or decline." Ansel looked toward Cormac. "What would you do?" It was the first time he had asked. Cormac considered the question carefully. "I would decide who needs the correction, not who wants the story." Ansel gave a small nod. "That sounds like Quaid." "I've been exposed to her methods." Evelyn ignored both of them. The radio program aired 4 days later. Miriam called it "warnings that were not heard." She recorded it in the studio rather than broadcasting live. Evelyn reviewed the script for legal issues. Lenora checked every technical statement. Owen insisted on replacing 3 dramatic phrases with less satisfying but more accurate ones. Ansel declined to record an interview. Dorian agreed to provide a short statement. Miriam opened the program with Caleb's name, not because he was her brother, she explained, but because his voice had survived in the recovered recording as the safety officer confirming the hold.
She then read the names of all 9 people who had died, as she had done every winter for years. Only after that did she discuss the corrected record. She did not call Ansel innocent of every failure. She stated that he had failed to complete one documentation transfer and later withheld evidence. She also stated that those facts had been used to support a conclusion contradicted by newly authenticated records. Dorian's statement followed. "My missed verification was real," he said. "So was the fact that Ansel found it before final sequence. Both belong in the record. Removing either one makes the story easier and less true." Miriam explained the alternate channel restart and the ongoing review of command responsibility. She did not name the deceased program manager as the sole cause. The available evidence did not justify replacing one scapegoat with another. Near the end, her voice changed. For years, she said, the station had described the accident as the result of one technician's failure to act. That description had exceeded what the public record could honestly support. "We repeated a conclusion until repetition made it feel like memory," she said. "This correction cannot return the years shaped by that mistake. It can prevent us from knowingly carrying it forward." Cormac listened from the workshop. Ansel did not. He spent the broadcast at Reed's garage replacing a damaged regulator on an old snowblower. Reed had offered him 2 afternoons of work each week, presenting the arrangement as a temporary response to being short 1 pair of hands and long 3 broken machines. Neither man mentioned charity. At the station, Miriam ended the program without asking the town to forgive Ansel or asking Ansel to forgive the town. She read the revised facts. Then she let the silence afterward belong to the listeners. The reaction was uneven. Some residents called the station to apologize. Miriam refused to collect the messages into a public display. Others argued that Ansel's theft of the module still proved he was untrustworthy. A former contractor wrote a letter insisting the review had been influenced by emotion. 2 families thanked Miriam for not turning their relatives into background figures in Ansel's rehabilitation. One family requested that the station never contact them again. There was no single public response because there had never been a single private grief. A month later, the town council approved a change to the memorial inscription. The new line was short. Technical and safety personnel reported instability and initiated efforts to halt the test before its continuation. No individual name was added. The council had offered to include Ansel's. He declined. The morning the metal strip was installed, a small group gathered in the square. Ansel did not attend. He was sitting at Cormac's kitchen table with the written proposal in front of him. "They'll think I'm refusing because I'm bitter," he said. "Are you?" "Yes." Cormac waited. Ansel folded the proposal. "But that isn't why." "Why then?" "Caleb confirmed the hold. Dorian admitted the missed check. Other people objected in smaller ways. If my name goes there alone, the town gets another simple story." Cormac looked toward the rear office where Sable slept beneath the workbench. No heroes. No replacement defendant either. Ansel signed the form declining individual recognition. That afternoon, he drove past the square but did not stop. The new line reflected sunlight beneath the older inscription. A person would have needed to stand close to read it. That seemed right to him. Truth did not become more truthful because it was larger. Maeve continued helping Ansel with housing and benefits. She treated each completed form as useful and none as proof of transformation. When the board agreed to reconsider his lost medical and retirement eligibility, Ansel signed the paperwork without comment. He still missed appointments unless Maeve wrote them on a card and placed it directly in his coat pocket. Reed gave him a key to the side door of the garage. Ansel returned it. Reed gave it back the next week. By the third exchange, neither man discussed it further. Dorian joined a confidential support group for former military and contract technical workers who had lived through professional failures, investigations, or command pressure. At his first meeting, he described the missed verification before describing what others had done. That order mattered to him. Owen remained involved in the systemic review. Lenora transferred the authenticated files into controlled archival storage. Evelyn blocked 2 media requests for private medical details about Dorian and Elias. "The truth does not improve when stripped of everyone's dignity," she told a reporter who objected. Cormac opened the workshop officially at the beginning of April. He placed no sign about Ansel, the accident, or the recovered module outside the house. The only marker near the road read, "Varden Signal and Record Restoration by Appointment." He gave Ansel a workshop key.
Ansel stared at it in his palm. "I didn't ask for this."
"No."
"You trust me inside the house?"
"Yes."
"That seems reckless. It has boundaries." "What boundaries?"
"Do not reorganize my tools."
Ansel almost smiled. He did not come the next day, or the next week. The key remained with him, though Cormac sometimes wondered whether it sat untouched in a drawer at the transitional apartment. Ansel continued working at Reed's garage. He attended 2 appointments with Maeve and missed a third. Some days he answered Cormac's calls, other days he let them stop ringing. He had not forgiven Marrow Glass. He had not forgiven Dorian completely. Most of all, he had not decided what forgiveness of himself would require. The corrected record did not heal him. It merely removed one reason he had been told healing was undeserved. Near the end of April, a package arrived from Michigan. The return address belonged to Dorian. Inside was an old field radio with a dented casing, a cracked tuning dial, and corrosion around the battery compartment. A folded note rested beneath it. This came from the maintenance station after closure. It never received properly after the accident. I kept meaning to repair it. Maybe Ansel should decide whether it deserves another attempt. Cormac placed the radio on the far end of the workbench. He did not call Ansel. The object waited for him without demand. 3 mornings later, Cormac found Ansel standing outside the workshop door before sunrise. The last dirty snow remained in narrow strips beneath the pines. Light from the eastern sky spread across Winnecove Lake, turning the thinning ice silver. Ansel held the brass key between 2 fingers. He had not used it. Cormac approached from the kitchen with a mug in one hand. Sable followed, her steps slower than they had been at the beginning of winter, but still deliberate. Ansel looked at the lock. "Does it work?" "The key?" "The offer." Cormac took a sip of coffee. "It was never temporary." Ansel waited. In another kind of story, Cormac might have opened the door and invited him inside. He might have said the place belonged to both of them now, or that Ansel had finally come home. None of those statements were true. The house belonged to Cormac, the workshop was new, and home was not a word one man could assign to another. Cormac stepped aside. Ansel looked at the clear path to the door. Then he inserted the key. The lock turned. Sable paused at the threshold, as she always did. Cormac did not give the hand signal. Ansel opened the door and entered. Sable watched him cross the room. Then she stepped inside on her own and lay near the table where Dorian's radio waited. Cormac noticed the change. Months earlier, Sable had needed instruction at every unfamiliar doorway. The workshop was no longer unfamiliar to her. She knew its sounds, the quiet hum of the isolated power supply, the drawer where Cormac kept treats, the rhythm of Ansel's screwdriver when he worked without speaking. Safety, for her, had become a pattern rather than an order. Ansel removed his coat and stood over the radio. "Dorian sent this?" Cormac handed him the note. Ansel read it and folded it once. He always thought every machine deserved a second diagnosis. Was he right? Usually too late. Ansel took the wooden-handled screwdriver from his pocket. For the next hour, the 2 men worked without discussing the accident. Cormac cleaned the contacts, Ansel replaced a failed capacitor, and repaired a loose connection behind the tuning assembly. Sable changed positions once, settling closer to Ansel's boots as sunlight moved across the floor. The radio powered on with a low crackle. Static filled the workshop. Ansel adjusted the dial. Nothing. He checked the antenna connection, changed the frequency range, and listened. The static shifted, but did not resolve. Cormac returned to organizing a drawer of adapters. "You're not going to tell me to be patient?" Ansel asked. "No." "Why not?" "You already know."
Ansel turned the dial more slowly. A broken voice appeared beneath the noise, then vanished. He stopped, moved back by a fraction. The signal returned. A weather station from the opposite side of Winnecove Lake reported wind direction, overnight temperature, and changing ice conditions near the northern channel. The voice was weak, but intelligible. Ansel rested his fingers on the tuning knob. No one celebrated. The radio had not erased the years it had remained broken. Its repaired signal did not excuse the people who had ignored earlier warnings. It was only a machine performing the work it had been built to do. Receive accurately, transmit clearly. Cormac arranged the last row of tools. Ansel sat beside the radio and listened to the weather report repeat. Sable placed her head on her front paws and closed her eyes. Sunlight reflected from the melting snow outside and entered through the workshop windows. It reached the locked access panel in the wall, the table where the hidden module had first been documented, and the brass key Ansel had placed beside the radio. Cormac had spent years believing his work was about finding what people concealed. The module behind the wall had taught him otherwise. Finding was the easy part. A wall could be opened, a damaged drive could be copied, a buried signal could be recovered from static. The harder work came afterward. Preserving the truth without turning it into a weapon. Admitting what it could prove and what it could not. Returning choice to the people whose lives had been reduced to someone else's conclusion. Across the room, Ansel adjusted the radio once more. The weather signal became steadier. He did not look like a man restored to his former life. He looked like a man sitting in a new one, uncertain whether he intended to stay. That was enough for the morning. Outside, Winnecove Lake was beginning to open. Inside, no one waited for permission to begin again. Sometimes the hardest choice is not whether to tell the truth, but how to tell it without creating another victim. Ansel's name was finally corrected, yet healing began only when each person accepted the part of the silence that belonged to them. In our own lives, courage may look less like winning an argument and more like speaking honestly, listening humbly, and refusing to let someone else carry all the blame. May God give us the wisdom to protect truth, the grace to face our mistakes, and the strength to open the doors we have been afraid to enter. Please share in the comments what stayed with you most from this story, and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and the quiet choices that can change a life.